Peter Parker is a criminal. That's why he's hiding.
It's time to clear my name.
Superhuman strength and spider-like reflexes may seem unbeatable, but you'd be surprised. One of Marvel's most recognizable heroes is Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. This insanely powerful character began his hero career when he was just a kid, and has fought several people throughout his history. Heroes and villains alike, Spidey has taken countless opponents down, but there are just a few who have escaped his web of tricks and bested the spider again and again. Some of the characters Spider-Man has never beaten are due to the fact that they rarely ever have reason to do battle with the webhead. Iron Man is one of the greatest heroes in the galaxy, but even he has had several instances in the comics where his moral stance, or judgment at the very least, was put into question. One of these instances was during one of the greatest comic story arcs of all time, Marvel's Civil War. When Tony Stark and Steve Rogers were pitted against one another due to ideological differences, leading to all-out war, Peter Parker was basically the kid in the middle of the divorce. Originally fighting with Tony, some instances caused Peter to question his position.
Mr. Stark, what should I do?
What we discussed, keep your distance, web them up.
Okay, copy that.
This included imprisoning heroes in the negative zone, and the Thor robot created by Tony's team ending the life of Bill Foster. When Peter decided to leave, Tony was ready, having predicted his defection from Team Tony to Team Cap.
Big fan of Spider-Man.
Yeah, we'll talk about it later.
However, he would not let him leave without a fight. As Peter tried to escape, Tony unloaded his repulsors on the wall crawler. Spider-Man tried to escape, but with Tony's reinforcements, Spider-Man was left in terrible shape. This allowed Thunderbolts members to beat him within an inch of his life. If it was not for Frank Castle, this choice to oppose the great Tony Stark could have cost Peter Parker his life. Tony's relationship to Peter gives him a distinct advantage. In fact, it was the fact that Peter was wearing the Iron Spider armor that Tony was able to predict Peter's defection. Without the suit, Spider-Man would take this hands down.
I think this is all I have. I'm nothing without this suit.
But the fact is that when the time came, Peter can really learn a little bit about preparation from his once mentor, Tony Stark. One of Spider-Man's most savage villains is the mighty Carnage. This was at least until he recently made his on-screen debut, had an argument with his girlfriend, and essentially got eaten by Venom like a pile of cotton candy. However, for many years in the comics, Carnage has been one of Peter Parker's most dangerous foes. While yes, fights with Spider-Man have sometimes led to Peter Parker being victorious, the fact is that Peter always needs help to take down the symbiote psychopath. In their first ever meeting, Peter was completely overcome by the power of the red symbiote. After the serial murderer Cletus Cassidy came into contact with Eddie Brock, he found himself bonded to Venom's offspring, unleashing an unholy creation that would lead to years of havoc on comic book pages. When Spider-Man first encountered Carnage, he basically dropped to his knees and prayed for help. Carnage nearly destroyed Spider-Man, but he was able to escape. He was then so desperate to defeat the villain that he went to another villain for help. At the time, Venom was Spider-Man's equal, as the two had done battle several times, proving themselves to be evenly matched. It was in this moment that Spider-Man needed the help of one of his greatest enemies to stave off something even worse. This is essentially the story every time the two come together. Carnage attacks Spider-Man, pushes him to his absolute fighting limit, and ultimately forces the wallcrawler to call in characters like Venom, Toxin, Dusk, or Black Cat to help him actually defeat the psychotic symbiote. It is Carnage's inhuman strength and weapon creation abilities that make him such a threat. The fact that he was born from Spider-Man's equal, and then bonded to probably the worst possible role model on the face of the planet that makes him such an unbeatable Spider-Man foe. It's really just a good thing Carnage didn't join Venom in the dimension-traveling bungalow, because Tom would definitely need at least Andrew and Toby's help in that fight. The Incredible Hulk is an absolute monster and one of the most unstoppable characters in the Marvel Comics. He has fought and defeated so many strong characters across a variety of universes and storylines. These include decimating heroes and villains alike, and one hero who he comes into conflict more often than you would think is the Amazing Spider-Man. One of their first fights was in the same issue that featured the debut of Spidey's longtime arch-rival, the Green Goblin. Little did he know that wasn't the only green-themed person he would come into contact with. This first fight perfectly exemplifies how the fights between Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk usually go. Hulk far outmatches Spider-Man when it comes to strength. However, Peter's speed is unmatched by most. Therefore, the fight is usually Hulk smashing everything around Peter as he tries to evade. More often than not, the Hulk is basically a bull that Peter guides towards things that need to be punched. However, he really never beats him. He evades and often escapes, but if Spider-Man was to turn and face the Jolly Green Giant, he would likely get his arms torn off by a brilliant scientist with an anger issue. Essentially, Peter's tactic is always to throw some quick jabs and then dodge. Now, Spider-Man is definitely stronger than your average Hawkeye, but his punches still likely tick the Hulk off more than they actually do any damage. More often than not, Peter Parker and Bruce Banner are fighting on the same side. But there are those pesky times where the Hulk rages out of control. If only Natasha were still around to teach Peter the lullaby. Though granted, that thing only really has like a 33% success rate at this point. Spider-Man is an understatedly powerful character. The amount of superpowered beings he has taken down is too large to count. Some of these victims of the Spider beatdown include the X-Men. I do of course mean all of them, at the same time. One of the most impressive showings of power from Peter Parker came in Marvel's Secret Wars event. At the time, several Marvel characters were crossing over, and it took a long time for any amount of trust to be built. There was friction, to say the least, between the Avengers and the X-Men. Spider-Man took this mistrust into his own hands and fought the entire X-Men team. This included Wolverine, Cyclops, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Storm, and Rogue. In their own words, Spider-Man made the team look like a bunch of amateurs. However, there is one X-Man who Spider-Man just stands no chance against, and that is their leader, Professor X. I mean, it makes sense, considering this guy's whole on-screen reputation is that he needs to be taken out early in the movie so that he doesn't just instantly solve all the problems. Spider-Man lacks fancy helmets that would protect him from Professor X's powers. In fact, in this particular instance, Professor X entered Peter's mind to make him forget why he was even there. Spider-Man left the scene in a hurry, and the X-Men he had just beaten up were extremely confused. The Master of Mind Control then revealed his intervention, having completely reordered Peter's mind. Peter may have inhuman strength, reflexes, intelligence, and fighting ability, but his mind is ever vulnerable to the likes of one of the most powerful mutants. Professor X can easily stop Spider-Man, and if he was ever to take a darker turn, he could have Spider-Man beating himself, likely asking, "Why are you hitting yourself?" over and over. Everybody knows Venom. We love that lovable head eater, right? The large, massive symbiote has never lost to the Amazing Spider-Man. Okay, just kidding, he's been beaten many times. However, Venom is not the only symbiote that Spider-Man has come into contact with. One unique specimen who Spider-Man has never been able to defeat is Venom's counterpart, Anti-Venom. He is a hybrid symbiote that has a very unique origin. When Venom and Eddie Brock separated, some traces of the symbiote were left in his body and bloodstream. Eddie was diagnosed with cancer and underwent several experimental procedures to try and cure himself. It was here where the traces of the Venom symbiote were combined with white blood cells, creating a new white symbiote dubbed Anti-Venom. Anti-Venom had all the powers of Venom, including strength, healing, and resistance to Peter's Spidey sense. He also was granted immunity to Venom's weaknesses like fire and sound, and on top of that, he gained something called an impurity sense. This allows him to sense any harmful foreign entities within a person's body and get rid of them. When the Anti-Venom symbiote bonded with Eddie Brock, Spider-Man was enemy number one, and he even used the impurity sense to expel the radiation that gave Peter his powers from his body. Spider-Man literally stood no chance against Anti-Venom. I mean, heck, he could barely handle regular Venom. Luckily, Anti-Venom eventually left Eddie and joined with Flash Thompson instead, putting Peter in a much less dangerous position. Anti-Venom was so dangerous to Peter that not only was he capable of causing him physical harm, but he could have stopped him from being Spider-Man altogether. There are some characters who Spider-Man rarely crosses paths with. One of those characters is the King of Wakanda, T'Challa, aka the Black Panther. On top of the fact that they often operate on opposite sides of the globe, they are two of Earth's mightiest heroes. Even when they do come across one another, they are fighting world-threatening terrors like Thanos or Doctor Doom or Batroc the Leaper or something. So whether it be because they just can't find the time, or because they both fight for good, what reason would they have to fight against each other? Well, misunderstandings happen. In an issue of Marvel Team Up, Spider-Man confronted Black Panther about a kidnapping, believing that T'Challa was involved in some way. This one confrontation did not last long. Spider-Man got a few good punches in, but ultimately the Black Panther was able to subdue Peter rather easily. This makes sense and demonstrates T'Challa is probably one of the most underrated Marvel fighters. His strength likely doesn't quite match Spider-Man, but it certainly comes close. And his reflexes, well, let's just say there's a reason the phrase is cat-like reflexes and not spider-like. After their short spat, they used a power that would stop 95% of all fights, their words. The two realized they were purposely being pitted against each other and in true hero fashion teamed up to save the day. On top of his speed and agility, T'Challa is just a more experienced combatant than Peter, and is able to use his superior fighting knowledge to take out the teenager. If these two were ever to square off again, it may go differently, but as of right now, Black Panther is undefeated. There are some characters that Spider-Man just really shouldn't even ever try fighting. I think it's safe to say that a God of Thunder would fit securely on that list. As the Prince of Asgard and God of Thunder, Thor is one of the most powerful beings in the universe. He has the ability to fly, superhuman strength, the ability to manipulate lightning, and is worthy of wielding the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. Thor can go toe-to-toe with the likes of Hulk and Thanos, and is one of the most feared warriors throughout the cosmos. While Spider-Man is certainly no slouch, these are levels of strength he just can't compete with. In the comics, these two really have no reason to fight. They are often on the same team, or not even interacting with each other at all. While Spider-Man is cleaning up the streets of New York City, Thor is out on Vanaheim or Jotunheim protecting the Nine Realms. Both are important jobs for sure, but let's just say they're definitely not in the same league. Thinking about it, even in the MCU, these two have really never even interacted. Thor missed the Civil War, and they were on different battlefields for Infinity War. Then Spider-Man took a 5-year dusty hiatus, and the two of them shared a battlefield in Endgame and attended a funeral together. However, they have never interacted, let alone fought. It's probably a good thing too, since Thor could likely throw Peter into space. Imagine, if you will, that the Earth was the size of an apple. That would make Spider-Man literally the size of an insect. And not even a big insect like a worm or even a spider, but more like a tiny fruit fly. Then imagine that tiny fruit fly tried to fight you. How do you think it would go? That's pretty much the imagery you get when Spider-Man tries to take on the Devourer of Worlds himself, Galactus. There have been times, however, where Spider-Man can do a great deal of damage to Galactus' heralds. A being called Firelord was granted the power cosmic as a herald of Galactus. At the same time, Spider-Man was granted the Enigma Force, a power that chooses a worthy being in their time of need, and was gifted the powers of Captain Universe. This allowed him to tangle with and even defeat a cosmic being like Firelord. However, his master is a whole other story. He stands taller than Celestials and is imbued with the power cosmic. It is rare that a single being can take on the might of Galactus. Certain characters like Thanos or Odin have been able to, and even they don't defeat him. Even with the cosmic powers of Captain Universe, I'm afraid Spider-Man's Empire Strikes Back trick would basically be like trying to circle a planet where the legs of a being like Galactus stand. For breakfast, Galactus could literally eat the planet that Spider-Man calls home. The only times he has ever gone up against beings like Galactus are when he is side by side with numerous other heroes. Even then, he would basically swat him like a fly, or, the spider. If there's one weakness Spider-Man has, it's his precious Aunt May. If there's one villain who loves exploiting weaknesses, yeah, I would say it's probably Mephisto. I mean, hey, you try to beat the literal devil, spider powers or no spider powers. When Aunt May became terminally injured in the One More Day storyline, Mephisto used his greatest power, the power of the deal. However, at this point in time, Mephisto wasn't dealing in something as simple as souls anymore, and instead took the love he shared with Mary Jane. Spider-Man gave this up willingly. Not only was he not able to defeat the Red Menace, but he did exactly what he wanted. He became a pawn in the devil's schemes. The same man who cursed Johnny Blaze and manipulated the children of the Scarlet Witch did the same thing to Peter Parker. Anything to see a soul in pain. He took Peter's and MJ's marriage. In turn, he took the child they would one day have. And Peter was left to live his life as though he and his true love had never met. Aunt May was saved, but the world was forever changed. Just the way the manipulative Mephisto wanted. Sure, people like the Hulk and Thor can use their fists to break Peter's face, but Mephisto uses his powers to go after possibly the most vulnerable part of Peter, his heart. Since in the MCU it's been all but confirmed that Nick Fury, Morgan Stark, Happy Hogan, Captain America, Okoye, Janet Van Dyne, and Dale from Baskin-Robbins have all been Mephisto this entire time, it may be sooner rather than later that we see Marvel's Devil attack the heart of our favorite wall crawler. The MCU's newest Avenger and lover of karaoke is yet another person the wall crawler has never been able to best. I mean, it makes sense. You don't get the name the Master of Kung Fu if you can get beat by a spider-themed superpowered teenager. On top of his incredible fighting skills, there are just very few reasons that Spider-Man and Shang Chi would ever fight each other. In the events of Spider Island, Shang Chi even taught Spider-Man his Kung Fu fighting style. This is one instance where the student is very unlikely to surpass the master, even if that student is powered by a radioactive spider bite. The fact of the matter is that Shang-Chi is just a mastery over his mind and body that is extremely unlikely that anyone would be able to beat him in hand-to-hand combat. Shang-Chi has essentially been a mentor to Peter, and in their sparring sessions, Peter has never been able to reach the level of his master. On other occasions in other storylines, Peter, upon meeting Shang-Chi, has tried to punch first and ask questions later. And let's just say it never goes well. Now that Shang-Chi is powered by the 10 rings in the MCU, Peter would need a lot more than a spell from Doctor Strange to take on the universe's greatest fighter. Some rematches with these characters may see Spider-Man victorious, but as of now, they're on top. I imagine soon he may come into contact with even more. Multiverse. Which characters that Peter has yet to fight do you think would kick his spider butt?